Hi guys, welcome back to the Art of Server. So today's video, we're back at the Quanta SD1Q-1ULH storage server. The last video, we looked into the hardware, and I was originally going to kind of continue on and do some firmware updates and BIOS updates and stuff like that, but I guess the previous video got long enough, so I felt like I should separate this out to a separate video. So today's video, I'm not going to be showing you the hardware as much, but we're going to be logging into the machine, and we're going to try to update some of the firmwares and BIOS and stuff like that. So before I get started, I just want to show you how to and where to go to find the downloads that you need to do these updates. So just in case you're following along kind of my little journey here with this SD1Q-1ULH server, I just want to show you where I found the downloads. So it's pretty straightforward. I think most of you can figure it out, but I figure this just might be a little helpful. Basically go to qct.io, which is the website for Quanta Cloud Technologies, and under support here in the menu, go to Download Center. Alright, and then you get to this Download Center page, and under product type, originally I picked rack mount server and I couldn't find this, so I had to go down to storage server under the storage subcategory. So if you pick that, it narrows down the product model list, and you can see that the SD1Q-1ULH is located right here. So if you go ahead and click that, and then you can further narrow down what you're interested in relation to that server, but I find it easier just to select all here and go ahead and click go, and basically it's going to filter down everything that is related to that particular server. Now of course there's stuff here that you probably don't need, but it's the only way for me to kind of get most of what I need in this left hand side menu. So first thing here is the compatible component list. That might be useful to download just to check out, and like if you're hunting for a compatible RAM that's been tested with the server, you might want to look on that list. But anyway, what's going to interest us today, because we're talking about BIOS and firmware updates, we're going to be looking at things like storage firmware. And so if I click on that, you'll see that you'll have the Quanta 3008 SAS controller firmwares here. And so you guys know I love ZFS, and that's what I hope to use with this server. So I'm going to pick the IT mode firmware here. Now I've actually already downloaded everything, but I just kind of want to show you where I found stuff. So I'm not going to download it again, but basically you click on here, and there's a page where I think you have to agree to the terms of the download, and then you get to download it. But anyway, and you can also get the IR firmware here as well, and then there's also firmware for a 3108 RAID card as well. So anyway, you can pick any of these. I picked both the IT firmwares here, and so there's the version system that they use is different from the LSI scheme. There is kind of a mapping between the two, but they call it like 1B10, 1B08, and so I downloaded both of these, and then I went down here, BIOS. Once you click on that, you get this list of various BIOS versions. Now the BIOS that I have on the server is different than everything that they have listed here, and I'll get into that in a little bit here, but basically I just downloaded everything here just because in case I'm probably going to try the latest and greatest version, which is dated 2020 January 21st, which is this S1Q_3A14. I'm probably going to try that, but if there's a problem, I might downgrade to one of the other ones. So I went ahead and just downloaded everything. The next was BMC firmware, and here I downloaded 3.33 and 3.31, and I didn't bother downloading anything older, and I'll explain why in a little bit here. But basically, it seems I went into the release notes, and there's something that I'll mention to you guys in a second here, but basically requires me to have 3.31 and newer, and so I only downloaded these two. Furthermore, down here under Expander is the Expander firmware, and I went ahead and downloaded 1.08, and this version apparently is also required for what I'm going to try to do here. So anyway, that's pretty much it. So I went ahead and downloaded all those things, and so you can too, if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and download all these things. And feel free to pick anything else here that you find that you think might be useful to you. If you're running Windows, for example, they've got a bunch of drivers that you can download and stuff like that. And they also have a driver for the network card for Linux. I'm not really sure if that's necessary or not, but I did download that just in case. But anyway, so yeah, that's where you can download all these files that you need to do the updates. Now, some of these firmware updates I think are going to require some external utilities that are not part of the download, and I'll get to that when we get there. So anyway, I've got the system up and running, and it DHCP'd to this 226 address, so I'm connecting to that. And so this is the BMC kind of web UI, and the default password and login here is admin, all lowercase basically. So if I hit that, it will log me in, and so this is pretty typical type of BMC or IPMI web interface. We got a listing of a bunch of sensors. Everything is green, so that's good news. And here is what's a little bit peculiar about this server. And I don't know if all the servers that are being sold by Core4 Solutions, where I got this server from, basically come in the same fashion, I guess. But I have firmware version, and this is for the BMC, 53.20.00. And if you recall back here, the BMC firmware versions are like 3.33 or 3.31. And so at first I'm like, well, this doesn't really make sense. Like, how do I compare? Like, how can this version, which is also, by the way, dated June 9, 2017, be a greater number than this that's dated on a later date on 2020, right? So that didn't quite make a lot of sense to me. I actually sent an email out to Quanta asking them about this, and they said, oh, the server I received was an ODM, so it was basically built for somebody else, another company, and it was sold under a different brand. And because of that, they had kind of their own version of firmwares that are kind of, I guess, based on what Quanta provides, but they're maybe a little bit slightly modified, maybe branded or something like that. I don't know. But they told me that basically the hardware would be identical, and so that I could go ahead and flash the standard Quanta versions of all the firmwares onto that box. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today. Hopefully it doesn't brick my machine or cause any problems, but Quanta's support did kind of indicate to me more than once, because I wanted to really make sure, so I asked them kind of in 3 different ways, in 3 different emails, the same type of question, and just kind of wanted to make sure, and every time they basically said, yeah, go ahead. So so I'm trusting that advice is good, and we're going to see what happens. And if it doesn't work out well, hopefully you guys don't do this before me and you can learn from my mistakes. But we'll see what happens today. I'm hoping nothing bad happens. But all right. So there's this issue of the firmware version, kind of not making a lot of sense as far as relative to what's available for download. But I'm going to go ahead and use the 3.33 BMC firmware update. And then the BIOS version I have right here, you'll see that it's a little bit different. It's S1Q_3A08.HGT03. So the BIOS versions that you saw earlier here do not have this like dot extension, right? If anything, it's just like another number. And in this case, I have this HGT03. So I'm guessing that this has some reference to the ODM that this machine was sold under, but basically I think what it means is that I have the 3A08 version of the BIOS, which is not even listed here, but at least these what's available seems to be a higher iteration of that, so that's a little bit easier to compare and say, okay, I can probably just upgrade. So I'm probably going to go for the 3A14 today and see how that goes. Okay, so another thing that to make note of is the expander board firmware version, and this is 0520. And from the documentation and release notes that I've read, this is basically, I know there's like no segmentation, or it's just basically like 4 digits, but this is equivalent to 0.5.2.0 basically. And why that's significant is that let me get to the other point that I wanted to share with you guys. So let's go ahead and just get on the server here. I'm gonna fire up the remote console. Yep. Okay, let's do this. Okay. Alright, so here is the remote console. It is a Java app like many other remote console solutions in other servers. There does seem to be, the icons are a little bit different. The menus have slightly different options. Well, I'll discuss that in a second here. But okay, so let me go ahead and refresh that. Let me just log in today. So I have a USB drive that has CentOS 7 installed, and this is just one of those tools that I have handy around all the time. I boot up a lot of my systems with this USB drive just to test things out, and just gives me a very quick environment I can set up without having to reinstall OSs and stuff like that. This is not going to be the final OS installation or anything like that. This is really just for testing purposes. Okay, so like I said earlier, I had already downloaded all those files that we mentioned earlier from QCD's website, and so I have them over here. And I was looking through some of the notes, and one of the things that stood out to me that I want to mention to you guys, because I think it's pretty important. If you look at the Readme file for the BIOS update, I recommend that you actually read through this. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, obviously. That would just, I think, not a good way to do a video. But I do want to point out something that I saw here that I think is pretty important. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so under notes here, it says, before update BIOS to 3A13 or later version, which is going to be what I'm going to do, because I'm going to go for 3A14. It says, or later version, check BMC firmware is newer than 3.31. And so that's why earlier I said I'm going to use the 3.33, so that at least that's newer than this. And expander firmware is newer than 1.08. System may hang on post if above firmware versions not compatible. Okay, so that's the thing that I really want to point out to you guys. If you guys have bought this machine and you haven't messed with the firmware or the BIOS updates or anything like that yet, I think it's going to be important that we get the firmware for the expander updated and also the BMC updated before we do the BIOS update. So that's the key thing I want to point out to you guys today, and that's what I'm going to try to do. So now going back to looking at this thing. So remember here that says expander firmware newer than 1.08, and then they tell you, well, expander board firmware is 0520, and at first I'm just kind of scratching my head. Well, okay, how do I compare a 1.08 to 0520? And so then I went through digging through the release notes and basically figured out that 0520 is what they in the release notes at least refer to as 0.5.2.0, and 1.08 is also referred as 1.0.8.0. And so basically the version I have is older than 1.08, and I need to update to 1.08 basically. 1.08 should turn out to be like 1080 basically here. Okay, so so just to add clarification to that, so you guys who might be just as confused as I was at first looking at this number versus what's mentioned in those notes, that's how you kind of compare those. Okay, so but anyway, before we get into that, let's just take a quick look at the Java. Okay, so something strange just happened. I was about to talk about this Java KVM interface, and the system spontaneously just rebooted itself. and I found these errors. So it's claiming there's an uncorrectable ECC error on DIMM B0 asserted. So, and then this machine check exception is probably related to that. So yeah, that's not good. So I definitely don't want something like this happening if I'm in the middle of a firmware update. So I'm not really sure if the DIMM is bad or the DIMM slot is bad or something else. But I think I'm going to shut this machine down, and I'm going to go ahead and pull B0 out. Just because I don't need, both memory modules to do a firmware update. So I'm going to go ahead and shut the machine down now and go ahead and pull this out just to see if maybe I can avoid this error. That definitely doesn't sound good, although this memory module was fully tested. I ran it on another machine with memtest 86 plus for a full pass without any errors. So I'm a little bit concerned maybe there might be something wrong with the DIMM slot. But anyway, definitely don't want this happening during in the middle of a firmware flash. So you know what, I'm going to go ahead and shut this machine down. Oops. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and shut this machine down and pull that memory module and see if we can avoid that from happening during any firmware update activities. Alright, I'll be right back. Alright guys, I'm back. I've pulled the B0 DIMM module, and so the system now only has a single 16 gigabyte module. That's plenty for what I want to do today, but so you can see now there's only one 16 gigabyte module instead of the two that were in there. I'm hoping that it's just a bad DIMM module and not a bad DIMM slot. And just as a little side note, what I'm probably going to do afterwards, hopefully get all this today's video done, but afterwards I'm going to put both DIMM modules back in, and I'm going to run memtest 86 on this machine and see if I can re-trigger that error. And if I can, then I'm going to swap the DIMM modules and see if I can re-trigger that error. And if the error follows the DIMM module that I moved, then I know that there might be something wrong with the DIMM module. But if it remains in the DIMM slot, even though in the first test the DIMM that was in DIMM A worked fine, but now that I move it to the B0 DIMM, if it starts having problems there, then I know it's probably the DIMM slot. In that case, I may ask the vendor for a replacement machine or something like that. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of describe to you kind of what I'm thinking in terms of how to troubleshoot that problem. But I'm hoping that by removing it, we're not going to encounter that sudden reboot. Certainly that would really suck if that happened in the middle of a firmware update. So anyway, I hope things are going to be stable now, but I'm going to move on with today's video so I can just kind of get this done. Alright, so anyway, enough of that. Let's get to the updates. So the first thing I want to try to update is probably the expander. And so if I do ls-scsi, and this is in Linux, you can see that I can see the enclosure, which is the expander. It's the model, I guess, is D51PH-1ULH, and the firmware version is 0520. Okay, so like I said earlier, I've already downloaded all the firmwares and stuff like that, so I have it under the storage folder, and I've already so it's this is the file, the 12g-expander_1.08-zip. That is the file I downloaded for the expander firmware. And when I unpacked that zip file, it created this S1Q_LSI_FW folder. So I'm going to go in here, and I believe that the file here that is S1Q_LSI_FW_V.10. Or 1.0.8.fw is the firmware file. Now, the tool to do this firmware update, as far as I've seen, now the Quanta documentation doesn't really give you any explicit instructions on how to do this. But I did kind of do a little research online, and I found someone referring to the store CLI command, which is kind of the latest and greatest equivalent of what used to be called Mega CLI. And so I do have that tool on this flash drive, and so I'm going to use that and see if we can download or update the firmware on the expander. So I have that tool under this directory here. Okay, so I have the 64-bit version, so it's called Store CLI 64. There are Windows versions of this tool, I believe a DOS version and a UEFI version as well. So they're all going to be somewhat similar. I haven't seen anybody do this in Linux, so I'm not really sure, because sometimes like these tools have limited capability depending on what environment they're in. Oftentimes people reference the UEFI or DOS version, and in those environments sometimes these programs have a little bit more capability than they do, say, in Linux or Windows. But I'm going to give it a try and see if it works. So anyway, first thing I'm going to do is, the syntax for this is you do a /C for controller, and I only have one controller, so it's probably going to be controller C, and I think I can do like a show, and that should, I'll give it a second here. I think that's going to basically query the SAS 3008 controller, and it's going to tell me the model number, the serial number, the SAS address, and all that good stuff. And this is basically the equivalent information we would see if we ran, for example, SAS 3 flash -ls list. So I'll just kind of show you that as well. So the SAS 3 flash program basically, I think, is getting the same type of information, but formats it the output a little bit differently. And let's see. So I think I should be able to do -E all show. Let's see if this does it. Okay, yeah. So the -E is for enclosure. So when you do a sorry, /, not dash, but when you do /C0, that references the 0th controller, which is the only controller on this machine right now. And then another /E will reference enclosures, which are basically SAS expanders. And you can reference them by number or all. The keyword all will basically show all of them. And so you can see here that it is identifying the D51PH-1ULH SAS expander, which we saw earlier under the lsscsi command. And you'll see here that there's this vendor specific string that says 0.5.2.0, and this is where I got the hint that basically the 0520 is the same as 0.5.2.0. And you'll see that EID, which is like the expander or the enclosure ID, is 0. And so if we wanted to just reference that one enclosure or one expander, we can replace the all with 0 and do a show, and I'll get the exact same thing, because now and then I'm just only looking at that one particular expander. Okay, so with that now it's kind of settled that we know basically the ID number of the expander and the controller. I believe there's a download command, and let me see if I can get some help output on this. Yeah, okay, so the syntax for this is going to be /C0/E0 for the specific expander and controller, download source src equals file path, and then there's a force activate. The option is used primarily to activate Scotch Valley enclosures. Okay, I don't know what that Scotch Valley enclosures are, so I'm not going to really do anything about that, but I know my firmware file is this file here, so I'm going to say source equals S1Q LSI underscore FW underscore V.1.8.FW. Okay, so hopefully this will go ahead and update the firmware on the backplane. I don't know if this works. I haven't done this before. This is the first time, so let's go ahead and see how this works out. Unsupported command. Okay, so this is probably one of those situations where this program, Store CLI program, in this environment just doesn't have this capability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to boot up into a UEFI shell, and I'm going to put this firmware file on my USB drive with the UEFI version of this Store CLI, and I'll come back and and we'll try to rerun this command with that. So I'm going to stop the recording right now and go ahead and just prepare my USB drive with these files that I need, and then we'll boot up into that and continue from there. Alright guys, I'm back here. I've booted into the built-in UEFI shell, and I have my USB drive with the firmware and the store CLI utility in this USB drive. So I just did an fs0 : to get into the USB drive, and under the QCT folder I have a folder I created with the utility here and the firmware file. So first thing is I want to run this utility just to see if it works. So I'm going to do again the C0 /eall show and see if I can see the expander here. Okay, failed to get enclosure information. Well, that's not good. Let's see if I can do C0 show and just see if I can see the controller. Okay, so I can definitely see the controller. Can I do E0 show? Let's just see if that gives me anything. Alright, so I can see the expander here. Okay, so let's go ahead and give that command that we tried earlier a go here. And so it would be download source equals s1q_lsi_fw_v1.0.8.fw. So let's see if this firmware update will take this way. Okay, I have a status failure. Expander firmware download failed. Geez, and I don't really know why. Okay, well, that's not really working out. Alright, well, I'm going to have to probably research this problem a little bit more to see if I can find another way to do this. Apparently, doing it this way does not work for me, at least. This, let me just double check and see if, did I spell that right? S1Q_LSI. Yeah, it looks like I spelled it correctly, but for whatever reason, I'm not able to update the firmware this way. So I don't know why, and I'm gonna have to research this problem a little bit more and see if I can find a solution. So, alright, I'm gonna stop the recording here until I can figure this out. Like I said earlier, before I'm able to update the BIOS, I'm going to have to update this expander firmware along with the BMC firmware. And so I want to make sure these things are good to go before I do anything else. So anyway, unfortunately, this isn't going where I was hoping it would go. But I'm going to go maybe reach out to Quanta or somebody else that I saw online on Serve the Home forum that was able to do this successfully. Let's see if maybe they can kick me a hint or some insight here. So anyway, I'm going to stop the recording for now and come back and hopefully have better news for you guys. Alright guys, so I just noticed something pretty interesting, and I wanted to point it out and give this a try and see if it works. So I'm going to go ahead and record this. I don't know if this is going to work or not. But, earlier I ran the store CLI-C0/eall show to look at the connected enclosures or expanders. And it says product ID is D51PH-1ULH. And it didn't immediately hit me at the time when I first saw that. I just thought maybe that's just a part number to, the expander. But then I looked around Quanta's site, and that's actually a different server. So going back here, under storage servers, remember earlier we picked the SD1Q, which is the server that I actually have, but the expander that is being identified looks like it's part of this other server, the D51PH-1ULH. And so I looked up the expander firmware for that server, the D51PH, instead of the SD1Q. And of course, they have listed also a bunch of expander firmwares, and they also have 1.0.8. I went ahead and downloaded that, and that got me this file. That's a slightly different name. It says 12g-expander_fw dash Broadcom instead of just the expander_1.08. So so anyway, I got this file and I extracted it, and it gave me this other firmware file, the S2PH_LSI_FW_V1.08.FW. And so I thought, maybe some parts were swapped around. Maybe the expander from that other D51 PH server got put into this one. So I'm going to try this firmware from the D51 PH server. And so I've gone ahead and put that on my on my USB drive, and I'm going to go ahead and see if we can maybe apply that firmware instead. So I have that file here. Let me just kind of show you that. So I have both firmware files now. I have the one that we were trying earlier, which is this S1Q, the S1Q_LSI. I'm going to try this S2PH version of the firmware now. So let's go ahead and do that. So /C0 /E0 download source equals S2PH LS_LSI_FW_V.108.FW. Okay, so let me go ahead and just kind of close that window. I don't know if this is going to work, but looking at that product ID just kind of made me kind of suspect that maybe that part is a slightly different part that required different firmware. And so I'm going to go ahead and try it out. Let's see if this works. Cross your fingers here. All right, so hey, check this out, guys. Status equals success. So it looked like this firmware took. Now it might be resetting itself to reload the firmware, so I'm going to give it a few minutes here, but this is definitely a much better result than what we were seeing earlier. So anyway, if any of you guys are playing around with the server as well, take a look at what expander you have, and actually let me know in the comments section if you have an expander that identifies itself not as the D51PH-1ULH. If that's not what you have, and when you try to apply the firmware update, let me know if that S1Q LSI thing works. And actually I want to know if you don't have the D51PH-1ULH backplane, what does it identify itself as? Is it S1Q dash 1ULH or what, whatever it is? Just let me know, because I'm kind of really curious. So it almost seems like the backplane on this server was swapped out with the expander on this server was swapped out from another server that was the D51 version. So let me take a look and see if it's been a couple seconds at least. So let's see if it now shows with the latest firmware. Oh, it's failure. So it's probably still rebooting. I'll give this a few more minutes and we'll keep rerunning this command and see until we get some positive output here. Alright guys, so looks like the expander firmware is now updated. You can see it's still identified as D51PH-1ULH, and the vendor specific string here says it's EXP, probably for expander, 1.0.8.0. Alright, so that's it. That was all it was. I think we just had a different expander module that required a different firmware file. So anyway, hope this helps you guys out. I mean, definitely this had me scratching my head for a little bit, and I'm really glad that D51PH kind of bugged me a little bit after when I was looking at it. At first I just thought it was just the part number to a particular expander, but then it was like, whoa, that awfully looks like similar to kind of Quanta's server naming scheme. And then when I came over here and looked down at this menu, I said, whoa, well, there actually is a server named D51PH. And so, so when I did that, I found this other firmware, and that seems to have worked for the expander update. So now we got the expander update. Terrific. All right, guys. So here I'm looking at the BMC web UI, and as you can see here, the expander board firmware now firmware version is now 1080, which is the equivalent of the 1.08 that was referred to in the release notes for the BIOS update earlier. And as you recall, in order for that BIOS update to be able to be done safely, we have to make sure that the expander board firmware is at least this version, as well as the BMC firmware needs to be version 3.31 and above. And now, as you can see here, we have this kind of strange version, which is 53.20.00. And if you look at the release notes here, the latest version is 3.33.00. And so you might be thinking like, wow, I've got like the uber new version. But if you look at the date of the build, this is June 9th, 2017, while 3.33 is 2020, March 25th. And so I was a little bit confused about this. I reached out to Quanta and their tech support team, and I asked them about this, and they said, oh, that's because the machine that I have was originally built for somebody else, and so they have a different version, firmware version scheme. And that they assured me I could use the standard QCT firmware downloaded from their website and just simply overwrite it with this. So I'm hoping that works. I haven't tried it. I'm going to take their word for it and hope that, you know, that's okay and true. But, you know, at least if you look at, forget the version number, just look at the date. For sure, this version dated 2020 March 25th is newer than the version that's currently on the system. Okay, so there's a couple of different methods to apply this BMC update. You can do it through the web UI, you can do it under DOS, you can do it under Linux, and you can do it under Windows. I don't have Windows here. I do have a FreeDOS USB drive I could use, but I do have Linux installed already. You know, we could use the web UI, but I find that process doesn't really work. I kind of tried it. I didn't actually, obviously I didn't do the update already, but when I tried it, the web UI kind of just froze, and I didn't know what was going on. So I'm going to avoid doing this method right now, and I'm going to go ahead and just use the method under Linux. Now the last step here, it says you have to after the update is done, you have to power off AC and then power it back on again. And so keep in mind that's not just a reboot of the server. You actually have to like pull power, and that's because the BMC is always powered on as long as there's power to the power supplies, even with the server is off, right? So in order to reset the BMC, you have to like manually pull power and then power it back on. So we'll do that at the very end, hopefully, if everything succeeds. All right, so I've already got the virtual console pulled up here, so let's go ahead and log in. Alright, and I've got all the files under this folder here, so let's go into BMC and okay, so the instructions basically say run the linux.sh script, and so I'm just going to go ahead and try that. And let's keep your fingers crossed. Let's see what happens. The screen is kind of frozen at this point. I'm not really sure what it's doing. I wish there was a little bit more kind of user feedback here. Alright guys, I don't know what happened. Looks like I got disconnected, and I don't know if you heard it in the recording, but the server spun up the fans. I'm not really sure what the results are here. Alright, let's see. That's a bit unnerving. Okay, looks like I can still connect to the BMC. Okay, well, something definitely changed. The date is now 2020, and you can see that this now has a QCT logo and everything. So I'm going to kind of suspect that the update went well, except that it just disconnected me, and just, yeah, not the smoothest update process for sure. But let's see if we can log in and hopefully everything's okay. Password should be changed. Okay, I get it. Let's see. We'll take that. Okay. Alright, so they want you to change the default password. I suppose that's good security practice, but you know, in a lab environment, it really doesn't matter at this point. Okay, so it looks like the system is still working, and now we have firmware version 3.33.00, and this definitely looks like it is the default original QCT firmware. I don't think we saw this QCT logo up in the corner here before, and so things are, well, now event log free space, I don't know, I thought this had something a little bit more meaningful than just a blank circle earlier, but the system seems to be working, at least the BMC so far. You know, let me reconnect to the remote console and let's see if this still works. Okay, so lots of interesting things have happened, I guess, since that script ran. All right, let's see. Can I scroll up here and see what's going on? No. Yeah, so there was apparently a lot of output, but somehow it didn't make it to the screen, and so I'm not sure why that is. Maybe because the BMC got shut down during the update or something, and so this just wasn't really refreshing the screen. But so maybe if you were doing this like directly sitting in front of the monitor, you would have seen this feedback to the user, and would be a little bit less unnerving. So anyway, don't AC off or reboot system during BMC firmware update. Find flash chip number 1, update flash chip number 1, okay, waiting for BMC ready, and then start IPMI service, and then it says start IPMI service. So, you know, interesting thing is I didn't actually pull AC power on this yet, and it looks like it reset itself anyway. And so, so maybe that step in the instructions is not necessary, that it sends a command for the BMC to basically reload the new firmware. As you can see, it's already running that new firmware. So, okay. I guess this means we're clear to go ahead with the BIOS update, as well as I wanted to update the firmware on the SAS controller. So hopefully we're good to do that now, and it won't cause any problems for us. I have heard, so just a slight caution here, there have been people reporting that when they update the firmware, at first everything seems okay, and then a couple days later, they found the system shut itself off and it wouldn't boot up again. So if that happens to you, by the way, and it hasn't happened to me yet, so I'm speaking purely secondhand, you know, just from what I've heard, you can still get into the BMC and basically downgrade the BIOS. So keep a copy of the older BIOS and update the BIOS through the BMC, and then you should be able to bring the system back alive again. So if that does happen to you, you know, try to do that. I'm hoping it doesn't happen to me, but I'm doing this a couple days before I release this video. So I'm going to go ahead and update the BIOS, and if it causes any problems, by the time this video gets released, I will for sure leave something in the description of the video, or maybe in post edit I will put a big warning you know, thing, or you know, letters in the video to tell you guys don't do this. So anyway, you'll know what the results are, at least for me, and hopefully it doesn't ever happen to me. But that is kind of can be kind of scary when your system just doesn't power on at all or something, you know. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and try this, and if you guys want to just kind of wait a while after I release this video, and you kind of just want to leave the system alone and just play with it otherwise before you do any BIOS updates, you know, feel free to reach out to me, leave a message in the comment, you know, a week later, a month later, whatever. It's just, you know, you can ask me, hey, did your system survive after a week or something like that, or after a month, and I'll be happy to tell you guys. So anyway, I'm happy to be your guinea pig, let's just say. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'm going to apply the 3A14 firmware, or the BIOS update, and my understanding is, let's read this release note here, and I think they'll tell you how to do this. So there are 3 ways to flash the BIOS image. Burn the bin file via fixture. I no idea what that means. Update the bin file via BMC web UI, so I suspect that's through the web UI. Update BIOS region by AFU tool. So you can, in a UEFI shell, we could do that. In an x64 Windows environment, I don't have Windows, so I'm probably not going to do that. Well, I'm not going to do that. Let's just say not probably. It's definitely not, won't be doing that. I do have a Linux environment, so I might do this. Let's see. So it says power on system, unzip, release. Yeah, I've got that. Open terminal. Chmod 777 on everything. That just seems like a horrible thing, but okay, I get it. Execute file BIOS underscore lnx64 to update BIOS, and then execute batch file or shell script, I think is what they mean. ME, so that's probably the Intel management engine. Underscore lnx64.sh to update the ME firmware. After the update finished, perform a DC cycle. The new BIOS and ME firmware runs. Then please enter setup, press F9 and load default and save before any test run. Okay, so let's do it in Linux. Let's see how it goes. So I basically have to run the BIOS Linux shell script and then the ME Linux shell script, and basically power off the system and power back on, and then get into BIOS and press F9 to load the default settings. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that next. Okay, so BIOS LNX64, here we go. Alright, so that seemed to have succeeded. So next step is the ME underscore LNX64 script. Alright, let's go. Alright, so that seems to have completed successfully. So I'm going to go ahead and just shut down this machine and we'll power it back on, and hopefully we'll see that the updates are in effect. Alright, system is now off. I'm going to go and power it back on. Okay, I'm pressing F2 to hopefully enter setup. I'm not sure that it's doing anything right now. Oh, okay, it says enter setup. Great. I'm not sure it took the first time, but anyway, I pressed F2 again and said it was entering setup again. So, okay, we're supposed to hit F9 and load optimized value defaults, yes, and then we will hit F10 to save and reset. Now while that's happening, I kind of want to refresh the BMC screen here because it still says the old version here, and I don't know if maybe I have to reset the BMC for it to pick up the new value. But I know during post we saw the new version of the BIOS in the screen here, so I'm pretty sure it took, but what it's showing in the BMC UI is not current, I don't think. Okay, it looks like it might be trying to pixie boot or something. Maybe by resetting the BIOS settings to default, it's no longer booting off of my USB drive. So I might have to get in there and set that up again. Alright, just refreshed the BMC dashboard here, and it does show now that we have S1Q_3A14, which is the latest BIOS version that we just applied. So it looks like that finally updated in the UI. This is not going anywhere, so I'm going to go and reset the server, and I'll get into the BIOS setup and set up the boot order correctly. Alright, let's fix the boot order thing first. So I want, let's see, boot option number 3 to be, well, you know what, let's just disable it, because my boot option number 1, yeah, I'll have boot option number 2 be USB, although boot option number 1 is hard disk, so that's probably going to be like the LSI controller, trying to boot off the LSI controller, and there's nothing there right now, so hopefully it'll just skip that and then go to the USB drive. I'm putting in this order because I don't want to put the USB drive first, because later on I'm going to be actually installing some SSDs to boot off of that LSI controller, and I don't want it to accidentally boot off the USB first. UEFI network, yeah, well, we have all this disabled, so it doesn't matter. We're not going to be booting off of that. As far as a boot mode, I'm going to go ahead and boot legacy mode for now. I usually find that easier. Oh, okay, now it just changed everything. So hard disk, that's USB SanDisk, and let's just disable the third boot option. Okay, and in quiet mode or quiet boot, I'm going to disable that. You know, I'd rather see informational messages than that like silly 1980s logo on the screen that just provides no value to me. Okay, so that should be, yeah, I think that should be it. Let's save and reset. So while that's happening, let's go back to the dashboard here. So it does look like so QCT support was correct, I guess, in terms of there's no problem in applying the original QCT BMC firmware over the firmware that this machine came with. Alright, let's see this thing boot up here. So the final thing we want to do here before I close out this video for this session here is I want to update the firmware on that LSI SAS 3008 controller. I know for sure that's a little bit outdated. It's at version 14, and I believe the latest is 16. So we'll see. I downloaded the latest firmware, so we'll see what we get. Alright, let's log in. Okay, so one last thing is under storage I have the Quanta version of the LSI firmware here. Yeah, let's see what the release notes say here. So they're basically recommending that we do this in the UEFI shell, but I happen to have the SAS3 flash utility. I will probably just do that. Because the 1b10.bin file seems to be the firmware file, and the other two are just the BIOS and UEFI ROM files. Yeah, I'm not sure why they're doing an erase 6 and then erase 3 at the end. I don't really think that's necessary. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I believe I have the SAS3 flash tool here, right? So if I do a -list, I should see that controller. Okay, you know what? I'm going to save that output. So I'll say QS3008 SAS3 flash.txt. let's just save that information in case we need it. That SAS address, if we lose it, I don't know if it's printed on the motherboard or not, so I just want to save that information. Let's make sure that we still see that. Yep, okay. And so in order to do this update, I'm just going to do -C for controller 0. -O might not be necessary. That just enables the advanced options. -F for the BIOS, so I believe the 1b10.bin is the firmware file. -B for the BIOS, so we're going to do mpt SAS 3.rom for the BIOS ROM, and then mpt3x64 for the UEFI ROM, and hope this works. Let's see. Alright, that completed successfully. Let's do a listing now, and hopefully everything remains intact, and it is indeed. The SAS address is intact and everything, so that's great. We're still in IT mode, but we've got now the latest version. Although I think LSI has a slightly newer version. They have a 16.0.10, but that's fine. I don't know that there's any major bug fixes between the .8 and .10 version. Looks like we're done here. So if we reboot this machine, we should see this new version of the BIOS ROM loading up and all that stuff. But anyway, I don't think that's that important to show you guys. We basically have everything updated. We've got the backplane firmware updated. We've got the SAS controller updated. We've got the BMC updated. And between the backplane firmware and the BMC update, that allowed us to hopefully safely do the BIOS update. So far so good. It is working right now, right? So, but you know, I am a little concerned that some people have reported that it worked immediately after the update, but then a couple of days later the system just, you know, powered itself off and would no longer power on. So I'm going to give it a few days. This video won't be released for at least another 3-4 days. So hopefully between now and then, if I notice a problem, I will let you guys know. If not, then, you know, I won't mention anything. But if you're trying to be cautious about this, again, I'm happy to be your guinea pig here. So you're welcome to wait, you know, a couple weeks or a month or so before you do the update, and just kind of ask me again and see if my system's still up and running. So, and I'll let you know. All right, so that's it, guys, for this video. Hope this was useful. I hope you guys read the release notes before you do any of these updates. As you can tell, there were some dependencies there that were not quite so obvious. I don't think the update utilities actually check to say, hey, your BMC firmware version is not compatible with this update or something. So they're not providing any kind of safeguards around that, and so you really kind of have to read those release notes. And so hopefully, if you're watching this video and you haven't done it yet, that, you know, this video helps you out and ensures that you don't run into any problems. All right, guys, so that's it for now. I will have some more videos coming up where I want to add some hard drives to this system. I want to add some SSDs. I want to actually install an OS, not just booting off of my USB test drive here. And also redo the test on the noise and power consumption. I know I did that in the last video, but I know some of you guys will want to know what the total power consumption is with a bunch of hard drives and stuff in it. And also, you know, what is it under a workload? So I'll probably put like a CPU benchmark on the system and an IO benchmark on the drives, and see what, you know, maximum total power consumption can be. So anyway, we'll have more interesting videos to make about this system, but for now, this is it. And give me a thumbs up if you like this video, of course. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. We're gonna have a lot of interesting projects coming forward in the future here, so stick around. Thanks very much for watching, and have a good day. Bye-bye.